Can I have your attention, please? Distinguished guests, good afternoon. Thanks for coming on a Wednesday afternoon, beating the very heavy traffic. I think the turnout clearly shows that İlber Hoca doesn't need any introduction, and for sure I'm not the appropriate person to introduce such a historian, such an intellectual as İlber Ortaylı. But I was fortunate enough to be his student back in the university in Ankara 20 years ago. I took my last lecture from him 20 years ago. And like today, then also he was an iconic and legendary figure in our university and the academic circles. The number of languages he spoke, his photographic memory, the number of universities he's graduated from was of huge interest and source of inspiration for us. Needless to say, his lectures were a flow of history. We couldn't tell how the time went, and we always left each of his lectures with a lot of inspiration. And inspiration is where we left it at, because I mean most of are not capable enough to have his depth of knowledge and command of language. He has many, he's a prolific writer, especially lately. I'm not going to go over the publications he made, but for one, some of his books, especially the 19th century, the longest 100 years of Ottoman Empire, and his thesis on public administration in Ottoman Empire are still among the seminal works of his expertise. I would like to leave the floor to my professor, İlber Ortaylı.
This is my last class. So today I have to talk again on Topkapi. That wouldn't be a tour in art history or in the architecture of the palace, of course, because that I had done, I mean, I think 15 years ago here. And this would be rather a history, a social history of the palace in Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire is the one, I mean, who continued for 622 years till the end of First World War. But unlike German, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian one, it could survive a few years more. And after the Resistance War, the name is quite, I mean, extravagant. I mean, the War of Independence. With independence, we had nothing to do, of course. That was an empire. And as an independent body, an empire, we had our embassies and embassies at the representations in Istanbul. We had our foreign office. We had our ministries. However, I mean, defeated, we had our army. And we had, of course, the whole tragedy of after-war period. The First World War ruined and declined a good part of the world. Many dynasties went down, many traditions went down, and the life of old Europe and Asia went down. And suddenly we had a new era. How could we survive? That's the trouble. The provisionary government in Ankara took the capital as capital Ankara, and first time used the name of Turkey officially. The Great Assembly Government of Turkey, it's called from that way. And the president of Assembly was also provisional president of the government in Ankara, and the so-called that was in service of captivated Istanbul and the throne of the Sultan. And certainly after the victory, the Sultan had to leave this country, November 22. In between, there was an interregnum. Istanbul was under the control of the Allies, still Britain, and the Turkish new forces entered into the city after Mudanya Treaty. This short history is very important for the life of our palace. We have to change some of our rhetoric and some of our regions. First of all, the last Sultan had to leave Turkey without taking any coin, nothing, not even a ring from the treasury. The treasury was still the treasury of Sultan Selim the Green, the first one, sealed every time by imperial seal, and he did the same. Even he had borrowed one of the watches clocks of his father, Sultan Abdülmecid Han. He borrowed it. This was a loan. He had to give it back and take the factor also back, and that had been registered. And I also commit very perfectly and very frankly that the British administration of occupation didn't plunder anything. That was what we have expected from a major city and a great power who had the tradition. And it was also the fear and the shock of the administration in Istanbul whenever the Britain had to leave, the occupational force as the leading occupational force is posed to the Greeks, the young Greek army, latecomer of the First World War. That would be their nightmare, because they couldn't keep really neither Hagia Sophia nor Topkapi Palace nor the archives on a proper way. However, there was a company in the town, campaign in the town to get back Hagia Sophia to the Christian world. Even Sultan Vahdettin said, no, we don't allow that. Try to defeat the Hagia Sophia with your cannons, but that didn't happen. I think the British government had enough consciousness to get away from that type of crazy ideas. Certainly, Britain was very angry. No one in their history could hold their forces for 4 years. That was a long time for Britain to fight with someone in the Middle East. But that happened. At the end of the war, everyone had a Pyrrhus victory, as they pronounce. And this Pyrrhus victory launched everyone on the ground. It took everyone on the ground. And it was the nightmare of both, that they needed a fresh force. This fresh force would be certainly Greece. They started to use it for Smyrna, for the occupationist Western Anatolia, which brought Turkey, and which brought not even Turkey, Italy first of all, with the big hatred, with other powers and with Greece. But again, there is another surprising page, which we don't repeat in our national historiography. There they had only 2 men, The one is the commander of the Joint Army Forces in Syria. He took the powers from Liman von Sanders Pasha whenever he had to leave after armistice, of course. Mustafa Kemal Pasha, young brigadier general, and he had to come back, of course, leaving Syria to Istanbul beginning of November. This is the first figure looking the navy of the Britain, France, and even Italy. He said to his adjutants, Erdogan, well, they have to go back anyway. That was not a romantic expression of a defeated general, but just a logical conclusion. Another logical commander on that way was, surprisingly enough, neither a French nor a British nor the Russian white general, Baron Wrangel, but a Greek officer. The Greek officer, later General Metaxas, who was a real good staff officer, a very well educated and trained soldier, and unlike Mustafa Kemal Pasha, Mustafa Kemal was very, very fond of French army and military system. This guy was a product of the Prussian system, General Metaxas, and he was, of course, the opponent of Venizelos, the well-known royalist. He said, don't invade to Nikrasia, Asia Minor, because at the moment it seems to be they have no army. But the day afternoon or the day after tomorrow, they can appear there, because they still have their army and they still have their office staff. And he knew and recognized them, and it happened. So whenever, after 4 years period, the Turkish army from Anatolia entered the town, they found our palace almost untouched. This is a page I have to proclaim it here as a former director of the museum. This is the fact. Certainly the the palace had been changed into an official museum. And the first director of it was, Halil Ethem, the brother of famous Osman Hamdi. Osman Hamdi is the well-known archaeologist of Ottoman Empire. I would say he is the best among the best. But his contribution to the history of Near Eastern archaeology is very meaningful. He has excavated Nippur and then Adıyaman, the Nemrut mountain, but more than that, the Saida, or the so-called Sidon in Greek language, south of Beirut. And after this excavation, he discovered Elat, which belonged to ancient Phoenicia. So if you bring the material of Ernst Renan, who is a real genius of French literature and archaeology and antiquity, he created the literary monuments of Phoenician art. And his famous book, Manuel Corpus Semiticarum, shortly referred, which are the collection of the first Phoenician material and still used in education, that had been took to life together with the archaeological discoveries of Osman Hamdi Bey. And all we have today in archaeological museum nearby our palace, and this museum is a creation of the Ottoman archaeology, because our first archaeological museum is the part of Topkapi Palace, and everybody knows it. This is called Aya Irini, Saint Irene Church. Saint Irene Church is one of the first examples after Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, and the only iconoclastic cathedral on this world, created as iconoclastic cathedral and remained so. Except this cross, they have nothing inside, where we still keep our concerts, but inshallah no more, because the so-called sanat sevenler, the outlaws of Istanbul, have no sense sometimes. You warn them, I mean, this church needs an urgent and great restorative activity, and you have to leave this place. I mean, we are also not peasants, we also like, to listen to some music and choir and orchestra in this ancient church. Actually, it's not a medieval church, a late antiquity church, early Christian church. But the conditions are not available. We have to evacuate it and start with a very long restoration, because the problems are there. So that's why I'm doing this gossip, because I need everyone's support from this world who is interested in Turkey, in Istanbul, and in ancient monuments of it. So this is number one. You have to write down the restoration, urgent restoration of Aya Irini. Aya Irini, after the fall of Istanbul, after the conquest of Istanbul, never had been used as a mosque nor converted into a Muslim shrine. It was only a museum of the palace. The museum first for the flags and arms captured by Ottoman army after the victories. And then in 19th century, it became the function of the archaeological museum. Every found material, discovered one, had been first installed there, and only after the construction of the archaeological museum down in the garden of the Topkapi, they had been transferred there, Musehane-i Humayun, Asar Atikavur. The library of this new museum is quite rich. The archaeological reports in 4 languages, in addition many Ottoman sources, and all this belonged to the private library of the young Marshal Ahmet Cevat Pasha, Grand Vizier of Abdülhamid II, very enlightened man. And he also compiled some books on Ottoman military history, and interesting enough, a lot of monographies in algebra, because he is a general of artillery, and he had a good knowledge of maths, like Ahmet Muhtar Pasha. And the library was his own private one, dedicated, donated to this museum. And as Imperial University of Constantinople had no archaeology department, the director of the Musehane-i Humayun Archaeological Museum, Osman Hamdi, and later his brother, they all had the museum assistants, almost an informal archaeological department there. They all had been educated there. One of the excavators of Ephesus, then Perge in Antalya, Aziz Bey is there, and the first director of Topkapi Palace, Taksim Bey, is there. And so that was the emergence, the birth of the Ottoman Archaeological Circle and Museology and National Museum. What was this Topkapi? Topkapi is, we kept there and we found there only some cisterns from Byzantine period, because Istanbul had no aqueducts till 5th century. Emperor Valens constructed aqueducts and bought our water, sewage system and irrigation and all kind of water license system from Bulgaria, Strange Mountain. Till that time, this Istanbul had all his water reservoirs, like Alexandria, in cisterns. So it's another legend that Istanbul has wonderful air and water now. Istanbul only has a wonderful geography, a beautiful green wood, and very important and available strategical system, that's all. That's why the Romans established there this great town eagerly. But Abu Hawaii, Istanbul is just, something I think as poet Nadim in 18th century describes it on a very exaggerated way. Şu şehri İstanbul gibiymiş ve bahadır. And water today, Allah'a şükür, thanks to God, we solved it. But whenever I still was a young boy, it was a problem in the town, and forever. And in this city, of course, Muhammad the Conqueror, Mehmed the Conqueror, had hesitations to move the capital from Edirne, Adrianople, and from Bursa into Istanbul, but he wanted it, because he's a general, first marshal of the gunpowder army, So he had to build it. First palace he used is the place of Istanbul University, and formerly, war ministry, but he moved onto this, the place of ancient Byzantium. So our palace, Topkapi Palace, has a very pre-Hellenistic structure, not Hellenistic, but pre-Hellenistic structure. The name is Byzantium. And after that, the Romans, Greek-speaking people never used this word. No. Byzantium is the name given by Westerners. So that was maybe an ideological competition with the empire of the Christian Romans, used by Germans. Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. As Voltaire says, neither holy nor Roman, bunch of Germans. That's it. So this is a tile of that. And he, anyway, accomplished this task in 1459, 7 years after the conquest almost. But the first he had done at the beginning of the January 1454, inviting Gennadius Scholarius, the opponent of the council in Florence, and very much against the unification of Rome and Orthodox Church. He decorated him with all power, saying that, you are the head of this Christian nation, responsible for their education, their censorship, and for their financial affairs. That's a very typical point. And he even had his lunch together with him, despite the fact he never had a lunch with someone, and asked his viziers and grand vizier to accompany him to the gate, and offering him 6 horses, white horses, like Mercedes cars. That was his symbol, very important. And therefore, Orthodox Church was a sign of the first division, fully confirmed by the new Sultan. And he had the title of Kaiser Rum, Caesar of the Rome, Hakan, and Khalif. So another legend is, after the conquest of Egypt, Selim brought the title of Khalif and brought everything to Istanbul, including 300 people from Egyptian and Syrian ulema. Nonsense. Because Egyptian and Syrian ulema always had a deep conflict with Turkish and Romanian ulema. The Turk-speaking ulema, they included also the Tatars of Crimea and the Bosniaks of Bosnia, used of course Turkish, and they had their own way, their own ritual, and they had nothing to do, much to do with Arab ulema of Syria and Egypt, because the others said, first of all, of course, very proper, perfect Arabic, which the other group did not have, and they mocked with them. And on the other hand, they, with their habits and funny Turkish, the first group had the same attitude. They never came together. Even their careers, their way of promotion is separated under Selim I. So there is no reason to repeat this type of stories. The first story is created by the Turks in 18th century. After the Treaty of Kainarca with Russia, they said, of course, we have the Khilafat, and this is a spiritual authority. They just repeated the mistake of Russia. Then the Russians proposed themselves as the protector of the Orthodox Church, and said, well, you are also Khalif, you can be a protector of the Muslims in our empire. For that, they created this story, repeated even in Tableau Général Ottoman de Dawson, Mourage Dawson. That is a typical variant. But Topkapi has gained on that way after Selim the so-called relics of Muslim plus Christian and plus Jewish religions. The so-called Jewish relics are not so well accepted and respected by everyone. But the Christian, yes. We have the St. John the Baptist and etc., which is still visited and blessed by Patriarch of Istanbul, Roman Patriarch, I would say. And so on. This is a shrine for everyone. That's why I always kept, I'm not an iconographer, and I have no respect to any kind of sacred relics, but this is my personal idea. As director of the place, I always kept this respect and this ritual because people do it. If they do, there is no reason to create the problems. In addition, in this department, we have today the relics and the gifts of the Ottoman palace to holy places, Mecca and Medina, especially Medina in Armenia. As you know, despite the fact an armistice was signed in Mondros, in Limnos Island, Fahreddin Pasha, his staff and all soldiers said, no, we don't leave this place, I mean the Merkati Rasulullah, the place of the Peygamber, Prophet, and we don't stop with our holy war. And 57 days they went on with this war against Sharif, Hussein, and British forces. And at the end, however, they gave away. They were able to send all these gifts and emanat-ı mukaddese, holy relics from Medina to Istanbul. These are the new richness of this palace, very important. And that was the bedroom of Mehmet the Conqueror. And Bayezid and Selim, and even for a while, kept on that way. But I mean, after Selim the Green, they changed it into, of course, a place of Emanet-i Mukaddese, holy relics. And this is the most important thing. Topkapi Sarayı had no harem. The harem is built at the end of 16th century, at second half of 16th century, by the order Suleiman the Magnificent, and after the wish of insistence of Hürrem Sultan, the Roxalana, because she said, why should you go there and come back again, I mean, to your own? Better, I mean, carry our house to this palace, I mean. So this is the only part built by architect Sinan, however, has a good decoration and local, but I mean not an able one, and destroyed the symmetrical plan of the palace Elat. Topkapi Palace is rich on his treasures. The first treasure is the China porcelain. No doubt, we have the richest China porcelain, richest collection in number, in quantity, and the best in quality on this world. Our collection is not comparable to Red China, not even to the Taiwan, because these are porcelain used by sultans centuries long, especially started with the father of Mehmet the Conqueror, Murad II, and the Chinese even produce some pieces for our taste, even using Arab calligraphy and registering some ayats, verses, which are not fake. So you have the only examples of Chinese Arabic calligraphy on porcelain. Very interesting. You have to know that even this 3 volumes book collection catalog gives you that example. And whenever Louis XV started to produce, I mean, silver porcelain for France, which was a richness, because people talk about revolution in France, I mean, as if, I mean, France was only exploited poor country, which is not right, of course. In 17th and 18th century, France was the richest, the most productive realm in this world. And first of the silver porcelain gifts had been sent as a cadeau to Austria, to Ottoman Empire, and to Russia. So our porcelains are very, very attractive silver porcelains. The last year of my directorship, even the director of the silver porcelain has visited me and asked for an exchange or an exhibition. I said, of course, we would like to do that, but I don't know what happened. It's very difficult to go on with European museums today. But they also have a good collection of the İznik porcelain. And that's the place where we had to sign the Sevres Treaty, which is thanks to God, I mean, Grazia, they never applied, never operated. But in this hall in Sevres, they had it. Topkapi has also, I mean, some ancient monuments. Mehmet the Conqueror was a man of Hellenic taste. People talk about his knowledge in Hellenic language. That can be a legend, say. The Turkish historians never talk about it, including Tursun Bey. But the Byzantine ones, yes. And the Venetians and Genovese, yes, by Benambuski. And if you come to the library and start to examine the book read by him, among them you have, of course, Iliada, that he read in Greek, and also Atlas Majoris of Ptolemaios. It had been a terrible connection, and I should give my thanks to my dear friend and colleague, however not my colleague, he is famous geologist, Celal Şengör, for the restoration of the text. He paid a lot from his own pocket. And I should say none of the rich people in Turkey, I mean, had been to our library, where many books need the restoration and money, of course, for that. And this was used by him, a very good knowledge of geography. So much more interested than Henri Navigator with every kind of material. But why the Turks invaded to oceans so late, I mean, after Portuguese and Spaniards, that's another question of historiography. These people who discuss their problem, first of all, including so-called progressive-minded Turks, who prefer talking and not reading sometimes, is another question, but it had been studied. And certainly, I mean, our Chinese porcelain, over than 11,000, needs another museum, another building, and whatever. And whenever I asked for that, I have been only rejected and refused. So I don't know what's the taste of this life, what's the taste of these people, I mean, literated or illiterated, rich or poor, I still don't know it. But the museum gave me the idea. And certainly we have some other elements. The founder of the church had, of course, connections to Rome as well. And Pius II wanted him to take into his faith. And now there is another legend. There is a Babinger, Franz Babinger, certainly well-known scholar of this period, and his book has been translated into many languages. There he talks about a letter of the Pius II to Mehmet II, and there supposedly he says, well, I mean, if you take to our faith and join to us, we are able to submit you everything, the whole world. For that you only need, I mean, a amount of paper, water, a drop of water, aqua pauci. Well, where is this letter? He never had it, never read it. The good man, I mean, an Orientalist of the Vatican, Padre Vincenzo Porgi, the late Porgi, Rahmetullah, really good man. He found, I mean, a musvedde, a notice in the library. That was it. They thought about it. The clergy thinks about everything, and they write it down and they keep it then. Papers are to keep, not throw. This is the Library of Vatican. This is also the reason why they have a censor, because some notes in our life which we didn't open or send to someone are to kept. If you don't destroy them, so your luggage and your library should be closed. So Porgy had founded it like Babinger, and Babinger made a speculation, said that is a letter to Sultan Mehmet Fatih. Now comes the speculations. Many people among the Turks, very progressive people, they say, do you see, I'm sure he has accepted Christianity, kept it. No, it's impossible, I mean, whether you like or dislike. He was the Sultan, he was Khalif, like the emir of every community, and whether he had his sympathy or interest, curiosity for Christian religion as well as for others, that was not his ask. He only tried to divide the Christian religion, that's right. Creating Rome, created Eastern Rome, and created another one. I'm sure as his grandson, Suleiman Magnific did, he could support even Protestantism eagerly, and that's what they did. The function of the Turks in this history is to divide the Christian religion, to provoke them. They did it for a while. So it is history, and it starts also in our palace. You have, wonderful library. This library is not only an Oriental one. They got it. Suleiman Magnific collected the books of Matthias Corvinus, able, mighty king of Hungary. Among them a wonderful piece, an antiphonale of Hungarians, which has been repaired almost 20 years ago. And only and best music book of Hungarian music, because Suleiman was not only fond of Turkish music, but European as well. He has visited sometimes the churches in Pera, listening to organ. And certainly in this library you find Greek, Armenian, Latin, and even Georgian books. And this is the largest of the world in his colors, in his richness for 15th century. And the archives of Ottoman Empire in 15th century are not so rich, strange enough. You can't compare the archives of Mehmet the Conqueror to Rome, not at all, to Venice, not at all, to disorganized and mangled Genoese, no, not even to Grand Duchy of Burgund. Grand Duchy of Burgund in 15th century, including, of course, part of your country and part of France, was much more rich in registration, historiographical registration. It's not complete. On the other hand, the archives of the Patriarchate for 15th century is also not so rich. But you can find a very interesting source for that. It's Moscow. In Moscow, in old font, in Archiv Drevnych Akte, there is a very large font full of the correspondence of the Patriarch in Istanbul, Patriarch of Moscow, and the similar one. But they expect someone will come and exploit it, God knows. So, our palace had no second floor. only one floor. So very much similar to your Los Angeles. And life was not so easy. The apartments of the sultans had no volume. I mean, one could not live there. I mean, survive there 24 hours. It's impossible. So Ahmet III escaped with a private library. Sultan Murat IV escaped with 2 kiosk pavilions, Baghdad and Tremont. And the rooms and the so-called, halls of the Agas and the Munis were really overcrowded. 20, 40 people sometimes in a hall. And life was very hard and disciplined, and they learned. These are people, they studied and learned their everything. Either became good generals or intellectuals. That's the source of Ottoman intelligentsia. Some people couldn't stand it. For example, our Evliya Çelebi, famous traveler, he had no discipline for that. He left Enderun very early. A little bit small, spoiled boy. That's the old. And this palace has no capacity to represent the state, an empire in 19th century. Earlier, yes, beautiful ceramic, beautiful porcelain, wonderful site, and the outside, this panorama is wonderful, but in 19th century, no. Years ago, when I went there, Louis Vuitton, people of them came to me and asked to organize their yearly dinner, grand fete there. I said, no, you can't do that here. You may, but you can't do that. Oh, I'll come, etc., especially the Turks, because every Turk thinks, our Topkapi has no limits, it's larger than Versailles, no. It's a very economically established and very scarcely used by the ruling class. And they came with their architect. Of course, it's impossible. Even the largest hall is something like that without my chair. And there, you can't have, of course, the Louis Vuitton grand fete, it's impossible. Therefore, we change it into Dolmabahce for ambassadorial receptions and any kind of receptions, because even Russian embassy, after their rebuilding in 1840, caused some gossips. People said, the Russians tried to conquer this country and that will be the palace of the Russian Tsar, the embassy. No, but it was some sign for the building of a new palace. It's also not right that historic sources, textbooks in Turkey, show as the cause of financial crisis in Ottoman Empire the building of the palaces. No, not at all. The only cause is, of course, the war twice with Russia, and of course the late development of the railway system and manufacture and etc., and especially the reform of the agricultural system. That's all. I'm very glad, and certainly we have the construction, the description of the palace system further and further. I should say nothing has been changed. Now I'm teaching in the modern palace in part of Dolmabahce. You know it, even before and after fire, it was as scarce, the space, as it was in Imperial Dolmabahce, 4 or 5 people in one room. This is a case, and thank you for patience and coming. Hope to meet you again, but I think if you have some questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this beautiful lecture. I truly enjoyed it. My question is about to what extent Topkapi Palace has been used for training or education, especially those future administrators from especially devshirme and all that?
Before Mehmet the Conqueror, we had the palace school, Enderun one. Enderun school is a Persian word, as you know, Dedan. There is harem, it's an Arabic word, and then Enderun, Persi. And in Enderun, the children are educated because the best part of recruited one, devshirmes, are kept for palace school. I mean, physically tall people, very intelligent, and of course, they had been suffered by a brainwashing. I mean, they accepted, they received Islam, and etc., and adopted to new one. Why? Because they had been nothing. It's very difficult to change someone who had a very good background in life in former times. But if you have someone, I mean an illiterate peasant boy from somewhere, it's easy to educate them, the adaptation problem. And these people really had a good education, and they became not only, I mean, generals, sometimes artists, art historians, and even some limbs, I mean, clergy, we don't have clergy members of the time. And Persian was the language of Enderun in 18th century. They had been very well qualified in Persian, and of course in Masnavi studies, Mevlana. That's very important. Today we don't have such type of experts anymore. That's very important. So this Enderun school stopped with further education, unfortunately, in 19th century. And in 1910, it had been, I mean, it came to end legally. But this had been, of course, substituted by new schools like Galatasaray or Mektebi Maliye, etc., Mektebi Harbiye, modern educational system. The main principle is the Sultan's sons, children, had to study together with recruits. So that it created an interesting competence and competition. And so that, I mean, we have the Muhammad the Conqueror who could speak, read Italian and read Greek Ancient and could pen in Persian and in Arabic. Or, I mean, we had his son Bayezid, however hated Western Renaissance products and Hellenic culture, but he was good in Persian and in Chagatai dialect of the Baburids. And Selim was very good in Persian. His Persian is as good as, I mean, Ismail Safavi. And Ismail Safavi's Turkish is much better than Selim. Selim was the word of the 16th century. We have to know all these people. And Kanuni was, of course, Suleiman Magnific was very good. And these people had been educated there, reading history, geography, mathematics, and many languages. This palace school, Enderun, is a very interesting school, not only with the content of the text, but also any kind of training and ritual and protocol. For example, they could never address each other as per du, you only. That's very important. Yeah, thank you for the question. And in 19th century, of course, we had to abolish it. They brought another education, I mean, modern one. We did not have university till beginning of 20. But university had been in separate branches: engineering, medicine, law school, École Administrative, Mektebi Ülke Şahane, Academy of Beaux-Arts, etc. So they brought them, they collected them together. And buyurun efendim. Buyurun hanımefendi.
Do you think moving from Topkapi Topkapı to Dolmabahce, any significant on the Ottoman family?
Maybe we need, either, should I give you the
Okay, no, I can't say it like that. Do you think the moving from Topkapi Palace to Dolmabahce and the Ottoman family has any significance in their relations? Or
No, they had to do it because in 19th century you can't survive there. Some members remained there even after the construction of Dolmabahce, but there you can't rule the state. It's not a representation. It is another life, and unfortunately 19th century is less studied. For example, I give you another model. People have no idea about the knowledge of Sultan Reşat, the man of First World War. So Sultan Reşat, they had no idea what he knows, etc., and they underestimated him sometimes. Well, whenever the Maharana of Bhopal, you know Bhopal in India, Bhopal in India, this is a part of Muslim kingdom Hyderabad, Nizam Hyderabad, and under part of the Hyderabad, they are directly connected to the Nizam and not to Britain. And interesting enough, the Bhopal is always administered by female princess, female rank, no man. And so the Maharana of Bhopal wanted to go to Europe and then came back to Hajj for, pilgrimage back to Istanbul. And they had, of course, special talk and any kind of, dialogue translated because she spoke French or English in that. And then, she had to visit the ladies in harem. Of course, not translated, dolmesh is accepted there, man. The Sultan had to accompany him to harem, Sultan Reşat. And there they started to speak Persian. The Maharana of Bhopal was able to speak Persian. Probably she read, the tablets on the wall, like as we had it in Topkapi, the same tradition. And he asked maybe Hans Zaban and then they started. The man has a good education, training in Masnavi and in Mavlevi, so his Persian was good. So these are the biographical lacunes in our Ottoman historiography, very important. We don't know who were our monarchs. That's very important. Buyurun efendim. Other lady there. Buyurun.
I have two questions following each other. The first one is kind of relates to the Byzantine Empire. When Sultan Mehmed II decided to construct the new palace, what was the main reason for not keeping or remodeling the Byzantine Empire palace?
Which one?
The Byzantine Empire, East Roman Empire palace.
East Roman Empire imperial palace is under the ruins of Sultan Ahmed, but it was in ruins. And whenever you talk about imperial palace nearby Hagia Sophia, this is not the palace, the Senate of the Byzantine, Senatus. So Byzantine Senatus, of course, had not the same power as the Roman Senate, Campidoglio or Capitol. So he built it on this part of Istanbul, had wonderful sightseeing and very powerful location. So therefore, it should be the reason of that, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
And did they ever try to utilize them later? Because Topkapı was crowded and...
Topkapi is always crowded as Dolmabahce. Always. There was no luxury life in Topkapi. They had, the man had two pieces of dress, the ladies in harem 3. By the way, the harem people are very good real literates, and that's all, the food was good. They had their pocket money, but their luxury was nothing. They had to share a small sell sometimes a few people. Even the Sultan had not a good apartment. And the commanders of this department, they did not have a separate room, but something like that. I mean, mezzanine, they stayed there and slept there. Therefore, it was overcrowded forever. And if you can't find the example of Versailles, no, that's impossible. Buyurun efendim, siz sorun. Hanımefendi. I think the lady, you have to ask. My lady, you ask a question? No. Who else? Buyurun efendim.
My question is, as we know, Ottoman Empire was one of the richest and biggest empire over the time. And most of us, whenever we visit the European countries, such as like France or Italy or different cities, we are seeing a large, big, amazing, fantastic palaces. I was wondering, what stopped the Ottoman Empire to build more
I
fantastic
told you,
places?
first of all, we are not the richest empire. The richest empire was England. Whether they had a good social justice, that's another fact. And the richest empire was, of course, not an empire, Holland. These are people who benefited. For example, someone compiled a book, L'Âge d'Or d'Espagne, the Golden Age of Spain, is nonsense. Spain had gold, but that was not the era. The peasantry was very poor, it was diseases, even the aristocracy, etc. If you would ask me, I mean, why do you have same type of Türklerin altın çağlar, door of the Turks? That's not my guilt. This is, I mean, the ignorance of my general publisher. He put the name without asking to me. No one has organized. We have no. We are all children of Adam and Eve. Sinful people, we can't have, I mean, this richness. We have to work, we have to suffer. The only thing is law and justice, feeling of justice. It can redeem us. I mean, now I had to talk like a priest, but maybe. There is no golden age of anyone, I mean, not even here. That was the propaganda of 50s against communism. No one has golden age, so thank you. Buyurun.
What was the main reason for the decline of the empire?
The decline is, I mean, we were a military empire. Our armies and casernes are much better than Sultan's palace. You can see it in Istanbul. If you come to Topkapi, then have a look to Asian part. The caserne of the Sultan Selim, the other one is much better. And of course, the reform in agriculture, reform in manufactures is declined. In 16th century, we have the best textile after India. Everywhere you have Turkish textile. And we had that, I mean, they had kept sometimes for the army. So it was actually, I mean, a very modest empire, a modest life. The houses of the generals, pashas, are even not to compare to any kind of rich bourgeois of, I mean, himself, for example, in Burgundian part, or Bruges, not at all in Venice, I mean. This is a fact, of course. In Anvers, for example, there was a life, maybe not the best and beautiful city of the Europe, I mean, but it was rich. Rotterdam, etc. Augsburg was rich, Munich was not so. These are the facts. So the time had been changed. It was the time of the mondial navigation. We couldn't reach it. We only sent, I mean, our navy, not maritime affairs. So these are large, I mean, not to answer such a small lecture, but that's it.
The Turkish TV series are very successful in portraying Topkapi Palace and Süleyman the Magnificent and then Kösem. Do you think they're doing justice to history in those series?
Which justice in those series? With justice, I mean, you mean are they realistic or exaggerated?
Yes.
Everyone is exaggerating. If you want, I mean, 108 movies, Tudors, it's also an exaggeration. And he has to do it. We are not obliged to watch the boring life of the 108. It was a boring life, what do you think? I mean, it was not that much rich, I mean. It's a life, I mean, of course someone had, I mean, luxury, but someone else no. And, well, I mean, all the clergy had a good life is another sentence, I mean. The cardinals, yes, maybe, the Pope anyway, but not everyone. If you have the life of Cistercians and other orders, I mean, these are just, I mean, suffering. Yeah, but in movies we are not obliged to watch them. Yeah, we need our peace and taste. So please, we have to escape ourselves from the movies. Because whenever I had been in hospital, my doctor, my professor, she was really good, I mean, in her profession. But whatever we have watched in this Istanbul under my flies, this is not inconvenient. I mean, Sultan Murat IV, they say, has, I mean, predicted people, I mean, from anatomy. I mean, where did you get the anatomy? So, in Russia, for example, Pierre Legrand, Peter's beginning of end of 17th, he had been to Holland, and someone was, I mean, working on the cadaver, you know, open air, without formaldehyde in this age was awful sticky. And all the aristocrats, boyar around, kept their mouth out that way. He said, the man, the scholar, able doctor, he works on cadaver and tries to learn. You idiots and ignorant, if you keep your nose on that way, I'm going to tell him to use instead of bisturi your teeth, you know. So that's, I mean, so anatomical work was not interesting for these people, that's all. As well as in Ottoman Empire. I mean, Padua and then Nearland. But of course, anatomy is not that start. It did not start in Bologna and Padua. That's not right. Where did they start? I can ask maybe. Do you know? Do you have an idea? Huh?
Ibn Sina?
No, earlier than Ibn Sina. We are not sure about Ibn Sina's anatomical surgery. They're not. He used the sources very well. But where?
Egypt.
In Egypt, not an anatomy. That was, I mean, certainly, I mean, they used and they knew the body. But a man from Bithynia, from our country, this, you know, two doctors, and they had been to Egypt and worked by the doctors, the monks there, and so on. They went on, did something else. So, but of course, the elementary anatomy, the study had started in Italy using the Islamic sources like Ibn Sina, etc. So 18th century is a very general application of that. Böyle bir şey yani. You can't learn this history anyway from the movies. Movies are for joke and for entertainment. Science is not so entertaining, very boring sometimes, but it's also something. Teşekkür ederim o zaman.
Başka sorular varsa olur musunuz?
If you have a lady, then yeah. Make it the lady is there and then you.
Actually, this question is asked by one of my friends. He's not here today, so I'm ready about the question.
Alright.
Male. So he was wondering if we traveled back to like 13th, 14th century to Topkapi Palace,
Yeah.
would we be able to communicate with those people with our Turkish?
Without Turkish, of course.
How much? Would they understand us? Would we understand them?
Yeah.
Yani 13. 14. yüzyıla gitsek bizim bu dilimizi anlarlar mı?
Şu an
İngilizce. The Turkish of Ottoman and the Turkish of yours. Well, anyway, every language has been changing. The German of 16th century is very difficult. I made the translation difficult one, really. So even the German of Luther is, not so easy. It's the so-called Hochdeutsch of the scripture, the calligraphy of 18th centuries, a puzzle for many people. But I would say French made the first progress, Italian and French. Fiorentine dialect and French especially. If you read, the reports of the French ambassadors, for example, like Girardin, etc., end of 18th, 17th century, but it's today, instead of accent circumflex and S, mass, but it's very perfect. Some have been developed later, like Russian.